Boom, 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 boom. Welcome back to Candidly Fierce, where we have real conversations about truth, alignment, execution, and what it truly takes to build a life of purpose, peace, and impact. I'm your host, Therese Alexander. Over the last few episodes, we've been on a journey. In episode 1, we talked about what happens when you lose yourself while building everything else. In episode 2, we talked about releasing what no longer serves you. And in episode 3, we talked about execution, about taking the step, making the decision, moving forward even when you don't have all the answers. But here's what I've learned. Starting, it isn't the hardest part. Staying focused is. Because once you decide to change your life, build your business, pursue your purpose, improve your health, or become a better version of yourself, something happens. Everything starts competing for your attention. And if you're not careful, you will find yourself distracted from the very thing you prayed for. Can I be honest? Seems like I tell y'all all my business, but hey, here we go. There was a season where I lost focus, not because I didn't know what I was building, not because I lacked discipline, not because I lacked motivation. I lost focus because I became so consumed with everyone else's priorities. Everyone else's emergencies became my emergencies. Everyone else's problems became my problems. Everyone else's needs came before my own. And before I realized it, I had pushed myself back to the back burner. I was spending so much time responding to what needed my attention that I stopped being intentional about what deserved my attention. And there is a difference because not everything that demands your attention deserves your attention. Somewhere along the way, I started to drift from me. What I mean by that is I became so focused on solving problems, helping others, carrying responsibilities that were not mine or even my assignment to deal with, that I stopped paying attention to what I was building. I wasn't drifting because I didn't have a vision. I was simply drifting because I was distracted. And that distraction was costing me more than I ever realized. Let me tell you what I mean by that. You see, I was giving my attention to things that couldn't produce the life I said I wanted. I was thinking about everybody else wants and needs, that building their lives when they actually put no effort or no attention into what they wanted. I took it on. I was so focused on helping, solving, carrying responsibilities, and showing up as the strong friend or just the strong one that I stopped paying attention to myself. I stopped prioritizing my own growth. I stopped protecting my own peace. That is something, y'all. Don't ever do that. I stopped investing in myself. I stopped asking the hard questions. I stopped saving myself. I stopped pouring into me, right? And in order to pour into me, I had to go back, right? I think we need to hear that part again. I stopped investing in myself, right? Here are the problems. I stopped asking myself the hard questions. I stopped saving myself. And I know I am not the only one. There are people listening right now who spend so much time pouring into everyone else that they've forgotten how to pour into themselves. People who are constantly problem solving, constantly carrying burdens. Are you a person who is constantly solving problems? Are you a person who's constantly carrying burdens? Right? What does that look like? What does that look like when you stop pouring into you? Right? Stop constantly carrying other people's burdens. Damn it. I'm gonna be pissed. People who are constantly solving problems, constantly carrying burdens, constantly helping, constantly fixing, constantly showing up for everyone except themselves. And on the surface, it looks admirable, but underneath it, it's exhausting because eventually you wake up and realize you've been building everyone else's life while neglecting your own. That was me. I had become known as the problem solver, the strong one, the one with the answers, the person people could always depend on. And while there is nothing wrong with those things, I started hiding behind them. I gave the illusion that I had it all together. I showed up in a way that made people believe that I was always okay. But the truth was, I was carrying things that very few people understood, not because they didn't care, right? And I think sometimes we think that because people don't understand what we're going through, that they don't care. So I'm going to say that part again. Not because people didn't care, but because many people around me simply couldn't relate to the season I was navigating. They couldn't understand the weight, responsibility, or the pressure. And because I didn't feel understood, I isolated. I stopped sharing. I stopped opening up. I stopped letting people see what I was really carrying. And isolation became another distraction because while I was focused on everyone else, I stopped paying attention to what I needed. And eventually, I learned a lesson that changed my life. Hmm. That lesson was you cannot save everyone else, while refusing to save yourself. You cannot pour into everyone else while ignoring your own cup. And you cannot build everyone else's future while neglecting your own. That realization forced me to ask a very different question. Not That realization forced me to ask a different question. Not how do I become more disciplined, but what deserves my attention? Because attention is one of the most valuable assets you have. It's more valuable than money. It's more valuable than talent. It's more valuable than connections. Because whatever consistently receives your attention eventually influences your thoughts, and your thoughts influence your decisions. Your decision influence your actions, and your actions shape your life. Think about that. The quality of your life is often connected to the quality of your attention. And that's why this conversation matters, because many people think they're struggling with discipline when they're actually struggling with focus. And many people think they're struggling with focus when they're actually struggling with distraction. Distraction is one of the greatest thieves of potential, not because it destroys you overnight, but it simply pulls you away from what matters most. You have to get it together, one day at a time, one decision at a time, one distraction at a time, until years have passed and you're wondering why nothing changed. The reality is that everything is competing for your attention. Fear wants your attention. Comparison wants your attention. Social media wants your attention. Other people's problems want your attention. In this day and age, drama wants your attention. Negativity wants your attention. Perfectionism wants your attention. And if you're not intentional, you'll spend your life responding to everything. And I mean everything except the thing you're actually called to build. I've learned that the easiest way to drift through life is to stop paying attention to where your attention is going. Because when you're not focused, you drift, you react, you just go with the flow, right? Again, let's talk about that. When you're not focused, have you ever found yourself drifting or simply, as I talked about in episode 2, I react? Or maybe you go with the flow. And we've already talked about that on this podcast. Surviving is going with the flow. Leading is directing the path. You cannot direct your path if your attention is constantly divided. You cannot build your future if your focus is trapped in distraction. And that's where self-sabotage enters this conversation, because self-sabotage doesn't always look like destruction. Sometimes it looks like distraction, overthinking, scrolling, procrastination, staying busy enough to avoid doing the things that actually matters, or sometimes it looks like saying yes to everybody else's priorities while neglecting your own. And that's why self-sabotage is dangerous, because it often disguises itself as productivity. You feel busy, occupied, and exhausted, but you're not moving forward. You're just distracted. And there is a difference. One of the greatest examples of focus in my own life was my education. See, I earned my degrees because I stayed focused, not because I felt motivated every day. Who does to go to school? Not because I loved every assignment, not because every day was easy. There was days I was tired, overwhelmed, and didn't feel like showing up, but I stayed focused on the outcome. The same thing happened when I was focused on growing TNT Logistics. There were seasons when the business required everything I had: long days, difficult decisions, operational challenges, staffing challenges, financial challenges, days when things didn't go according to plans. I was frustrated and tired. Days when I questioned whether all of the effort was worth it. But I kept showing up. Not because I felt motivated every day, because I was focused. I was focused on building something meaningful, creating financial security, creating opportunities. I was focused on the vision that God had shown me. And when your focus is clear, you stop negotiating with yourself every day. You stop asking yourself if you feel like doing the work. You simply do it. You simply do what needs to be done. And that's what focus does. It keeps you moving long after motivation leaves the room. And that's a lesson many people miss. Motivation gets you started. Discipline keeps you going. But focus reminds you why you started in the first place. And without focus, discipline becomes difficult to sustain. That's why I don't believe most people have a discipline problem. I think they have a clarity problem, a focus problem, and even a priority problem. Again, this is just my opinion, but I think most people have a clarity problem, a focus problem, a priority problem, because because when your why is strong enough, your behavior changes. When your purpose is clear enough, your decisions become easier. When your focus is sharp enough, distractions lose power. And for a long time, I thought focus was simply a personal responsibility. I thought it was about discipline, willpower, determination. But as I began reflecting on the seasons where I was most focused and the seasons where I wasn't, I realized something. Focus isn't just about showing up, right? Again, this is my realization, not anybody else. So I'm going to say that part again. The seasons where I was most focused, and the seasons where I wasn't, I realized something. Focus isn't just about showing up. Focus isn't just about what you do. It's also about what you're exposed to. It's about what you're listening to. It's about what you're consuming. It's about the conversations that you're having. It's about the people you're allowing to influence your thinking. And that realization changed everything for me because the season of my life where I felt the most focused is actually right now. And when I stopped to think about why, I realized that the reason why the season that I felt most focused is right now, it's because the answer wasn't better time management. Wasn't productivity. It wasn't discipline. It was my environment. The people around me changed. The quality of my conversations changed. And that changed everything because conversations shape perspectives. Perspectives shapes decisions, and decisions shape outcomes. When you're surrounded by conversations about growth, purpose, accountability, execution, possibilities, and leadership, your attention naturally shifts towards those things. But when you're surrounded by negativity, drama, complaints, distraction, and excuses, your attention shifts there too. That's why your circle matters. Not because everyone needs to think exactly like you, but because the people around you influence what receives your attention. And what receives your attention eventually influences your future. One of the most important lessons I've learned is that not everyone has the capacity to walk with you through every season. Some people can celebrate your wins. Some people can encourage your dreams. Some people can support your growth, but very few people truly understand the weight of your assignment. And that's okay. That lesson isn't to isolate. The lesson is to become intentional. Intentional about your conversations, intentional about your environment, intentional about your focus, intentional about who has access to your mind. Because the life you're trying to build requires your attention. Your business requires your attention. Your health requires your attention. Your relationship requires your attention. Your peace, Lord, your peace requires your attention. Your purpose requires your attention. Everything you say you want requires your attention. And if you're constantly giving your attention away, eventually you'll have nothing left for the things that matter most. Before we close, I want you to take inventory. What currently has your attention? Who currently has your attention? What conversations are shaping your thinking? What distractions are stealing your focus? What are you feeding your mind every day? And are those things producing the life you want or the life you say you want? Be honest, because the life you want requires your attention. And if you're not intentional about where your attention goes, someone or something else will decide for you. Thank you for joining another episode of Candidly Fierce. If this conversation challenged you, encouraged you, or gave you something to think about, make sure you follow, subscribe, and share this episode with someone who needs it. And until next time, stay intentional and stay fierce. See ya.